If you want to understand Bitcoin, there's a new free course from the Bitcoin SV Academy. It's called Introduction to Bitcoin Theory. It'll take you a few hours, but you'll learn a lot about blockchain and the mining network. This week, I talked to Brendan Lee, one of the authors of the course, about the other end of the Bitcoin process. What actually happens when you pay money from one wallet to another? Well, it's complicated, but Brendan helped me untangle it, and I hope you'll learn something from our conversation too.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
Well, hi Brendan, thank you very much for doing this today.
My pleasure, Charles. It's great to talk to you again.
I hope I'm going to learn a lot because I enjoyed doing your course, which was Introduction to Bitcoin Theory from the Bitcoin Association, all 9 hours of it, and all 80 exam questions at the end, to which you had to get 60 out of 80. I just scraped through that, I'm glad to say. But one question was, if I had got 59, would I have had to start the course again?
I don't believe that you have to do the whole course again, although, you know, that's a great question. I've been through the course and I've got through the questions on the first time, so I don't actually know.
Anyway, I learned, the good thing is I learned an awful lot. And I think I kind of almost understand what a Merkle tree is and lots of other stuff like that. But the bit of it that I feel like I still don't understand is the bit that I actually come into contact with, which is when I move some money from out of a wallet. So to help us understand that, I made a small transaction of £1 from Handcash to Centbee. And what I'm hoping is that perhaps you can talk me through how I can find out exactly what happened in that transaction.
Okay, absolutely, we can do that.
Because all I get from Centbee, who I sent it to, is a long string of letters and numbers. This is it, and I can see that the money has appeared. So where do I go for further information?
So when you look in Centbee, does it show you a long string of numbers starting with the number 8 or a long string of numbers starting with the number 1?
Yeah, the latter. It started 13, in fact.
13. Okay. So when you sent that money to yourself, or can I ask, Charles, did you use PayMail? Did you send the money to, Charles at Centbee?
No, I went on to Centbee and I pressed receive, and then I copied that address, and then I pasted that into Handcash and said, yes, £1 to here.
Right. Okay. So what that effectively means is that when you've gone into your Centbee wallet, it's pulled out a private key. So when you establish your wallet, most people would be familiar with the 12 words that you get that you're meant to write down and keep safe.
Right.
That 12 words represents what we call a seed, from which your wallet can deterministically generate sort of an unlimited number of these private keys.
Ah, you're mentioning something that I recognize from the course, deterministic keys. Yeah. So yes. You need one starting point, and then it can produce any number of separate private keys.
Private keys, and then once you have a private key, what happens then is we take a particular private key and we do an elliptic curve equation on the private key. So we multiply the private key by what's called the generator point. We won't go too much into that. But the output of that equation is a public key. And you can give that public key to somebody and they can actually send Bitcoin to it. But that's not typically the way we do things anymore. So if you go back to the very early Bitcoin transactions, they're all what's known as pay to public key. And that's a very simple script that just has the public key and check the signature. And so what that effectively meant was that to spend that coin, you just have to provide a signature, and the network will evaluate the signature against the public key that you put into the UTXO that you're trying to spend. Now, what happened was that people decided that public key hashes were not user-friendly enough as a presentation format to hand around to each other. So they developed this address, which is what you see in CentB when you say receive money. So the 13GE5Q, etc. String of letters and numbers is a representation of a public key hash.
I wouldn't describe that as especially user-friendly either.
No, it isn't very at all. But what all of the wallet makers decided to do was to say, well, if I'm presented with an address, which is this particular string in this kind of format, I'm assuming straight away that the user wants to receive money into a pay to public key hash script, and that this address represents the hash that goes into that script.
When I go to CentB next time and ask it to receive money, will it produce a different string for me to send to?
Yes. So this is when we go back to that idea that, well, we start from this one seed value, but then we're able to generate an effectively unbounded number of private keys starting from that value. And for each private key, there's an address that corresponds to it.
Oh, okay. Now this is what we need to straighten out, I think.
Yes.
And so could I call the address the public key that goes with that private key?
Not quite. So it's one step removed from the public
But it's a
key.
version of the public key.
It's something that if you have the public key that you can use to prove that it is that public key that you wanted to sign the transaction with.
I've seen so many explanations of Bitcoin that try to use the analogy of your bank account, where nobody worries about giving away their bank account number because it can only receive money. And so that's like a public key where you can hand it out and people can send money to it. But this is not as simple as that then, really.
Well, it is. So you can effectively give that address to as many people as you like. And you know, if 1 million people sent money to that particular address, the network has no problem with that. The only thing is that because this is all happening in public, if you then went and sent some of those 1 million coins to somebody, and they can then look at those coins and say, oh, they all come from this address, and they can then go into a block explorer and type it in and go, oh, look, Charles Miller's received 1 million coins into that address. He's a millionaire. And you know, that's the kind of information that you don't want unsavory people to know about yourself. And so hence the reason why wallets generate what we call these keychains, where they just keep, so every time, in theory, every time you hit receive, if that address has actually been used to receive funds, the wallet should generate another address from the next private key in the chain.
But even if it's created a new address, the old one would still work if somebody sent money to it, right?
That's correct.
So I just get more and more addresses that people could send money to me with.
That's right. It's quite clear in the white paper that, you know, to preserve privacy, really you should be trying not to use the same keys more than once. But the reality is there are scenarios where maybe you want to use the same key 1 million times because you don't care that everybody can see that that's you.
But okay, so all of these separate and changing or new keys derived from one address, which is my address, right?
Well, so they are derived from the private key. So you start with the private key, and then you do the elliptic curve maths on the private key, and you get the public key. You take the public key and you hash that, and so it's a double hash function. So we do a SHA-256 hash and then a RIPE-MD 160 hash, and the output of that is a public key hash. And we take the public key hash and we put it through, basically we change the format of how we present it, and we put a 1 on the front, and we call that a Bitcoin address.
Right. That's good. So I think we've talked about only the very first step in this, which is generating the key that I will give to Handcash to ask it to send the money. So let's assume that I've got that far. And now I go onto my Handcash wallet and I press send, and then it says, where do you want to send it to? And I paste in that long string. And then I paste in, and then I tell it I'd like to send £1. So what happens then?
So then your Handcash wallet looks at the coins that it knows that you have the public key, the private keys for. It currently, most wallets just pick basically randomly out of the coins that you've got enough that you can pay that amount. And so typically if it's £1, they'll go and look for a coin that's worth more than £1, and they will bring that in and sign it.
When you say look, does that mean they have to sort of address the whole blockchain and say, what have we got under this private key, or what are we talking
yes, about? Yes, so effectively what they're doing all the time is talking to the nodes on the network and saying, here's a list of all of the addresses that I control. Please tell me which ones have money in them. And the network responds and says, here's all the UTXOs that these addresses that have funds from.
Right.
And so then the wallet uses that information. So it knows that those are the coins that have money in them. And so it picks from that list of coins. If you're trying to send £1, if it can find a coin that has £2 in it, it'll grab that £2 coin and use it as the input to the transaction. It'll sign that input and then take the £2 worth of Bitcoin, and it'll allocate £1 to a script that's using the address that you were given by CentP. And if you're looking at the transaction that Handcash has generated for you, it's actually split the remainder up into half a dozen other outputs of various different amounts.
Okay, right. This is what What's on Chain gave me when I entered that original number that I got off CentP.
Yes.
And so just talk me through what we're seeing here then, if you can.
Okay, so at the top of the page, we have the address.
Now, which address is that?
So that's the 13GE5Q blah, 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 big long string.
Is the address of what?
That's the address that you were given by CentP when you said, I'd like to receive some money. So the CentP wallet has looked in your keychain and gone, here's an address that you can use, and presented that to you, probably gave you a QR code and the address, and with an easy way to copy it.
Right.
So you've copied the address, you've gone into Handcash, you've pasted the address in and said £1. Handcash has recognized that this is a typical Bitcoin address. And so being a good Bitcoin wallet, it's gone, okay, the automatic assumption is that Charles wants this, or whoever's receiving this money wants to receive it into a pay to public key hash script. And so they've built the rest of that script around that address. And so they decode the address into a public key hash, and they put that into a script, and they send the coin out to that script.
Yeah, we're looking at this thing where it says summary script public key. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, so that's the public key that goes with that address.
So the first transaction then tells us that we've got another completely new number sitting there. And
so, okay, so let's look at this. So on the left-hand side, you can see an address starting with 1258 SP.
yeah,
And that had 0.01 BSV, or a million Satoshis in it. And so whatever a million Satoshis is worth, I think that's about, maybe £2 or something like that. So it's done what I was talking about. It's looked in your wallet and said, okay, Charles wants to send £1 out to somebody. What coin have I got in my collection that I can do that with in such a way that maximizes his privacy? So ideally, you only want to spend one coin at a time, typically. So it's found this coin, which has got a million Satoshis in it, or 0.01 BSV. And it said, okay, that's enough for us to do the transaction. We're going to use that as the input. Then what it's done is it's actually created 6 outputs. So anywhere from 10,000 Satoshis, 5,000 Satoshis, 20,000 Satoshis. And then there's one there, output number 4, which has a bit of a random value, 709,905 Satoshis, which is going to the address that you've provided. And so that is your £1 that's being sent to your CentB wallet. The rest of these coins are change that goes back into your Handcash wallet for it to select from the next time you want to send money. And this process of all of that being split out into those little coins, to you, the user, is very invisible. In terms of when you use your Handcash wallet, you don't need to know or care about that. But that's something that they do that improves your privacy.
right. Well, yeah, talking of privacy though, what information can somebody get about me from what we're looking at here? I mean, this is public, although it's only public because I've searched using the transaction information that I was given.
Well, everything is public. So anybody could go and happen upon this transaction while they were browsing through the blocks. So everything here is public. If somebody knew that was your address, they could go and search for it, and they could see that that address currently contains 709,000 Satoshis, or the equivalent of £1. But that's about all they can know about.
Right. Well, they will be able to know that after this has been broadcast, because they'll know that it's me. But yeah, so they won't be able to go into either of my wallets and see what else is in them, I guess, will they?
No. Okay. So for a little bit more context, because you've made this transaction public, they also know that this transaction was generated with this 1258 SP coin as the input, and that had £2 in it. And they also will know that all of these other outputs in there belong to your Handcash wallet. And so they could, in theory, monitor those addresses and wait and see the transactions that they get spent in, and know that that was you doing those.
So they've kind of got a marker on my activities, because anything that relates to these addresses from now on will be traced back to me, or could be.
That's correct. Yes.
Gosh, that sounds a bit worrying. But I guess if they've only got sort of 50p in them each, they might get joined up into bigger transactions, which were of more interest. And then they would be a little fingerprint on that bigger transaction, I guess.
So that's right. So there's a risk in doing things this way, where Handcash took so you've taken, what's effectively about £1.20. You've paid £1 into Handcash, and they've given you back 1 cent, 5 cents, 2 cents, and whatever else. Now, next time you go to pay £1, maybe your wallet looks in and it can't find a £2, and in fact it can't find anything big enough to send that output with just one input. What it has to do then is grab a whole bunch of these inputs and spend them in to make up the £1. Anybody who's looking closely could see all of those inputs and trace them back and know that the transactions that they all came from were transactions where you were receiving money, but they can't know the particulars of any of that.
Right.
They can't know who, where, what, when, or they can know when. They can know when to within the block timestamp.
But it does seem that, in order to attach human identity to transactions in the blockchain, you just need one sort of point of entry, and then you can follow that through its history, I suppose.
Well, so the only thing that I'd be able to surmise from this, and knowing exactly the particulars of this, is that you received this 0.01 BSV on this input, the 1258 SP input, and that you are also the controller of all of those outputs, but only because you've disclosed to me that you sent this from your Handcash to your Centbee.
Yeah, I might not have been telling the truth, of course.
That's possible as well. Maybe this is some other transaction that you just picked randomly on out of the Block Explorer, and it's got nothing to do with Charles Miller. And that's possible too. And I can't tell that. I don't. You didn't send the money to me. I've got no proof but your word that that's you.
But just stepping back a bit, I mean, this is complicated, isn't it? I mean, just the naming of things, whether we call it an address or a private key or a public key or whatever, that makes this a subject that is, well, I would say almost impenetrable to most people.
It's quite difficult, yes. And I think it's one of the aspects where certainly in the 8 or 9 year time frame where Bitcoin was really being managed by people who loved complication and loved to make things difficult for people to understand. I think through some sort of desire to appear, superior knowledge or something like this, they've made it such that it's a very bad user experience. And we've done a lot to kind of rescue the situation with BSV. So now when you go to send somebody money, quite commonly, like especially if you're using Handcash, for instance, if I was to say, oh, Charles, send me some money, my Handcash is just Brendan, that's exceptionally easy for you to use. Now, when you type Brendan in, there's a whole lot of complexity that happens behind that, but you don't need to know any of that. And in fact, for you to know just my handle and for your wallet to be able to reach out and get all of the information it needs without you having to do anything more or deal with some scary looking, big data thing, I think is a great step forward in terms of the usability of the system.
I mean, I think in a way it's an unfair criticism of Bitcoin that this is very complicated, because if I had somebody, if I don't know whether bank managers even exist anymore, but if I asked my bank manager to explain how money can be paid from my bank account into my credit card account. It would be the same, at the same level of detail. It would be
That's right.
just as complicated, I'm sure. But although I don't completely understand everything that we've been talking about today, by any means, I think I have enough of an idea to see what kind of an explanation it is and have a general sort of feel for the process. What I would like to ask you is, where are the actual Bitcoins? Can we put our finger on them in this process and say, this coin has moved from here to here, and now it's always going to be there until it moves here? Or are we just talking about people saying, I owe this person this, and then they say they how specifically can we point to Bitcoins themselves and say they exist like this?
We can very, very specifically point to the Bitcoins. And so if you're looking at the page that's open, so we can see on the left-hand side, there's one input. And we actually have a value of BSV that input contains. Now, it's being presented to you as an address, but then below that, you can see via C7A92, blah, 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 and then in brackets, 61. And so what that's saying is that, so that C7A9 number, that's another transaction. And this bracket 61 is telling you that the 61st output of that transaction is where those 1 million Satoshis came from. And so we've grabbed the coin that was sitting at that 61st output of that transaction, and we've used it as an input to this transaction. And so effectively, when we do that, we take that coin and we consume it. So that coin is if you tried to go and spend that same coin again, the network would reject the transaction because it doesn't exist anymore.
When you say if you tried to spend that coin again, you can't, but surely when it moves into my wallet, it could be spent again, can't it? I mean,
so the coin that we have taken and used is unique, and it can only be used once, but the Satoshis that coin contained can be used an unbounded number of times. And so effectively what we do when we pick that input out and say, this is the one we're going to spend, and we sign it, and it's got 1 million Satoshis in it, we unlock all of those 1 million Satoshis. And then what the wallet does is it takes them and allocates them to each of the different outputs that it's creating for that transaction.
In what sense is it the same Bitcoin that has left one wallet and arrived in another? Because all it is who owes what to who. They don't even have the same name in the two wallets. All they're joined by is the transaction, right?
Yes, that's correct. And so, but what we say is that the Satoshis that come into the transaction must go out of the transaction. So it's think of it like in terms of the laws of thermodynamics. We must conserve the Satoshis. So if 1 million Satoshis come into the transaction, 1 million Satoshis must go out of the transaction. So the unspent transaction output that we spend into the transaction ceases to exist, but it is just an envelope for the Satoshis. And so effectively by signing that script, we open that envelope, we remove the Satoshis, and then we redistribute them. And that's what those outputs are.
I think it is a matter of how you think about it, because I still would say that £10 cannot disappear out of my bank account unless it goes somewhere. And I'm sort of, in a way, trying to help people sort of understand this in a way that makes it acceptable. in that I'm saying that it's no more intangible than the normal financial system, where you don't, we think of being able to go into a bank and demanding cash if we want to, if there's a kind of run on the bank. But actually, that is just not possible at the sort of scale that most banks operate. And so that money in ordinary banks and in financial institutions is no more tangible than this.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that maybe yes, you could say, well, the Satoshis don't exist except as a record on the public ledger. And when we perform a transaction, what we're effectively doing is we're taking an existing record that we can assert ownership over and redistributing its contents. But that again is just recorded on the ledger. But for the first time in history, we're able to do that using a digital medium in a way that can't be duplicated or undone. And that's the unique aspect of Bitcoin. And I think is what actually does make them almost a tangible thing. I can go to this Explorer, I can see the exact money that was spent, I can see where it went, and there's no argument about that. So, to me, that's as real as being handed paper money.
Right. Yes, and it's true that you can dig into the system till your heart's content, or till your mind is blown, and you will not reach a point where there's any kind of vagueness or subjectivity involved in saying what has happened. So that is the strength of the system, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much. We've drifted from the minute details to the big picture philosophy behind it all, but it's been very, very interesting. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
I hope you've your understanding has been bolstered again, Charles, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. I'm very glad that you enjoyed the Introduction to Theory course. It was a lot of fun creating it, and the team has done an absolutely wonderful job of bringing it to life. And
yeah, I mean, I really would recommend it to people, and we'll put the link, obviously, that in the show notes for this. So I hope people will take advantage of it, because it's free, unlike some other courses. But it's really good. It would be nice if you could produce a certificate to say that I passed at the end. That would be a little bonus, actually. That's
something that we are looking at, and all I will say is watch this space.
Oh, okay, good. I hope I won't have to do it a second time to get my certificate.
No, we have records of everybody who's done the course, and so once we're ready to start distributing
the Bitcoin tradition, there's a record of everything.
That's it, exactly right.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. It's been really, really great talking to you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, Charles.
Great. Bye now. Thanks very much to Brendan Lee. And if you'd like to take Brendan's Introduction to Bitcoin Theory course, there's a link to it in the show notes. Please would you like or subscribe to this podcast or video, and please join us again next week for another CoinGeek conversation. Until then, from me, Charles Miller, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Welcome to the new world of esports on the blockchain. The game-changing experience unconstrained by anything but our imagination. Create games without limits on the only blockchain without limits. Revolutionize esports with the massive scaling power of the Bitcoin SV blockchain. Imagine building the best and most popular esports title. Create a virtual universe built on game integrity, seamless access to data and player insights, and the metaverse. Build gaming worlds for the lowest cost and fastest microtransactions for in-game items and tokens. Make pro features accessible to all and easily host more prize tournaments. Get new revenue streams for game developers. When it comes to games, the only platform that's stable and scalable is Bitcoin SV. Discover how you can start building the next generation of esports games.